Hello, Jorbs coming at you with another Spireside chat. We've been working through some Watcher cards, and today I want to talk about Foresight. This is a 1 energy power, and it says at the start of your turn, scry 3. So scry means you look at the top 3 cards of your draw pile, assuming that your draw pile has 3 cards in it. If it only has 0, 1, or 2 cards, you would only look at that many. It doesn't cause a reshuffle, so something to keep in mind. It's less good on like turn 3 or 4 quite often, this Foresight, because you just don't have the cards in your draw pile. And you look at those cards and you can choose whether or not to put them in your discard pile. So this is a way to accelerate through your deck to find the cards that you need, and also to discard things like burns or voids or whatever that enemies have placed into your draw pile somehow. The obvious comparison with Foresight is to the rare powers that other characters have, which draw an extra card every turn. So Ironclad has Brutality, Defect has Machine Learning, and Silent has Tools of the Trade. And Watcher has Foresight at Uncommon. I don't really understand. I don't have a great answer for why Foresight is uncommon where the other powers are rare. I think that Foresight is on level footing or possibly even stronger than those other powers. And so the rarity of this card seems a little bit out of place to me personally. But yeah, I guess I've spoiled it. I think this card's quite strong. I would say that in a tremendous number of the fights that I play in Slay the Spire at Ascension 20 in particular, the enemy has some card or maybe 2 or 3 cards or combinations of cards in my deck that I'm trying to play to beat that enemy. Whether it's a situation where it's a fight with lots of minions where I want to find my area of effect cards, or it's a fight where the enemy is attacking me for a large amount every other turn, and so like on one turn I want to play my big block card, and then on my other turn I want to play my big attack card. Or it's a fight where the enemy doesn't attack me straight away but like slowly ramps up, in which case I want to find my big scaling cards, like the cards that give me more strength or more block every turn. There are just many different things that your deck needs to do in Slay the Spire because the enemies are so different. It's not a game like Hearthstone where you play against somebody whose deck is sort of symmetrical to yours, where like they have about the same amount of health and they have the same sort of ability to draw cards and scale up and be powerful or whatever. It's sort of like playing a game of Hearthstone where like one player is the aggro deck and the other player is a control deck, except like massively exaggerated. Where like sometimes you're literally in a fight where my deck is capable of beating a 600 HP boss, but I'm currently fighting against an enemy with 30 hit points who attacks me for 9. And being able to win that fight while taking 0 damage is an important part of Slay the Spire, just as much as being able to beat the boss is an important part of Slay the Spire. And so your deck has to be able to do lots and lots of different things. And deck building in Slay the Spire is largely about making sure that your deck can do all the different things that are required of it by the enemies, more so than it is about making an internally consistent, strong strategy that your deck like executes every single time. There are very few strategies in Slay the Spire that are so strong that you deliberately want to build a deck that just does that thing every fight, over building a deck that can do that thing sometimes, but can also do other things sometimes if the fight requires it. Your Exhaust, Barricade, Feel No Pain, Body Slam deck for Ironclad often wants to have an Immolate in it too, even though the Immolate has nothing to do with any of the other things I just said. But Reptimancer is a fight, and Immolate's good against Reptimancer, and so you just throw in the Immolate. So what I'm getting at here is that being able to work your way through your deck to find the cards that are good in this fight is very powerful. And I think that scrying 3 cards is like almost twice as powerful as drawing 1 card, probably. I'm gonna say something like that. So A downside of these powers which draw cards starting next turn is that they don't do anything straight away. They're pretty slow. And that's always a downside of powers, is they don't tend to do that much straight away. They tend to be cards which start to do more and more as the fight goes on. And because of that, my tendency as a Slay the Spire player has been to try to build decks which don't really need to play something like machine learning or tools of the trade, just because turn 1, 2, and 3 are so important. And if I'm going to dedicate a few cards to making it so that my deck is much stronger later on in the fight, I'll tend to value cards which do something to like my stats a little bit more, like something like Wish, which actually gives me constant real number output instead of just drawing me one more card every turn sort of thing. But Foresight's so good that I'm like taking this card incredibly highly. This isn't the best Watcher card, but it is a card that can take a deck which is very awkward and turn it into a deck which feels extremely consistent and reliable quite impressively. The upgrade here takes us up to Scry 4, which is an okay upgrade. It's worth pointing out too, Watcher has some Scry synergies, and some people who are new to the character have sort of asked me how strong is Scry, or said like, hey, why don't you build a deck that's more about Scry sort of stuff, like doing lots of scrying. We've got like Just Lucky has Scry written on it, but this card's like not impactful at all. And I talked about Consecrate already with Watcher, about how Watcher tends not to like 0-cost cards all that much. We've got Third Eye, which is an okay block card, and in some situations can be a very valuable card if you have a deck which is having trouble finding very important cards that it needs. You have Foresight, which we've already talked about. You have... where'd it go? Where'd that... Weave. There you go. Whenever you scry, return this from the discard pile to your... This is like, I guess, one of the scry payoff cards, but it's just not very good. It just doesn't do that much. And then... is that it? The point I'm trying to make is, like, yes, scry is a mechanic on Watcher, which is supported by some cards. Oh, there's a power. There's a power that gives you block every time that you scry, which I don't even remember the name of right now because it's just very hard to make it work. Is it a rare? Anyway, doesn't look like it's a rare. I'm sure we'll find it eventually as we scroll through here. The general feeling that I've had in trying to... there it is, Nirvana. In trying to build decks which actually care about cards like Nirvana or Weave, is that, like, the cards that scry on Watcher are just not very good. And so if you're building an exhaust deck on Ironclad, the cards which exhaust are insanely powerful. And that's why the exhaust synergy is so strong on Ironclad, is that you want to take cards that exhaust anyway. And so when you're offered a Feel No Pain on floor 1 with Ironclad, even though you have like basically no cards in your deck that exhaust right now other than Ascender's Bane, you know that like a third of the card pool for Ironclad, and a lot of that third of the card pool is very strong cards, have exhaust written on them. And so you can actually take Feel No Pain on floor 1 with Ironclad, and even if you don't have a deck that's only about exhaust synergies, this card still does great things with whatever deck you do build, because you have like cards like Disarm just say exhaust on them. And then also there are a bunch of like enemies which give you reasons to care about exhaust. They put Dazes in your draw pile, they put Slimes or Voids in your draw pile. There are no enemies in this game that make you scry. There are very few Watcher cards that are good that make you scry. And so my general experience with scrying on Watcher is that the like synergistic payoffs for scry are not appealing in particular at all. But the actual effect, like the actual thing that says scry on it, like these two words here, scry 3, that part's pretty good. And so like Foresight's a quite good card. On occasion, Third Eye can be a good card. The problem with Third Eye is that it isn't a tremendously impactful card other than the Scry 3. And you have access to stuff like Protect and Deceive Reality on Watcher, so sometimes your block just to come from better places for your deck to feel good. Talk to the Hand's another noteworthy engineer. But yeah, the part that says Scry 3 is pretty good. And Foresight's generally a card. It's one of those cards where if you were trying to create a constructed archetypical deck for Slay the Spire, which you shouldn't do, you might say, okay, I want to build a stance shifting deck. And so you'd go through Watcher's card pool and you might like find Meditate. Oh, that switches stances in a very valuable way. You might find like Water. We can end turn and Calm. Sure, that's powerful. You might find something like Empty Mind. So leaving our stance if we don't in it, and we can find the other stance cards. And you might build this archetypical stance shifting sort of deck, which has all this stuff going on, right? That deck, if you were going to build it for whatever reason, should have Foresight in it, even though Foresight doesn't say on it anything to do with stance shifting, because Foresight's just a pretty good card. And in general, Foresight's going to be a pretty good card in your Watcher Slay the Spire runs. So, I think it's an interesting card. I have a lot of like personal affinity. I like the cards, which are good on their own, but don't match that well with the other cards. The cards like Disarm and Allaze, for example, Piercing Whale. The Strength Down cards, I think, are cards that a new player easily overlooks because they don't seem to fit into synergistic packages, despite the fact that they're incredibly powerful. And I think that Foresight is a similar sort of effect, where the other things that care about scrying aren't that good, but just like Strength Down is good because Strength Down is good, not because of the other cards that say when you make an enemy strength gain health or whatever. There aren't any cards like that, but if there were, say that. Yeah, the other cards which say when you scry gain 3 block, they're not that exciting, but the card that says scry 3 is quite good. And that's the thing to be thinking about with Foresight, I think. All right. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the chat. I'll see you next time.